Life in a Kansas town. Very early the next morning, the Culver family's first morning in Spring Hill, Dad woke just as the gray of dawn made his room a little lighter. Quietly, he stole out of bed, out the door, and into the yard, glad to be alone. He heaved a sigh of satisfaction at the quiet, at the good feeling that comes from a restful night's sleep, and at the cool beauty of the morning. He was satisfied with the change he had made in coming to Kansas. It looked like a place where he could be happy and pursue a vocation that had long interested him. He sat down on a stump and idly contemplated an old shed near the back of the house. As he sat musing, another member of the family awoke and, like her predecessor, stole out of the house. "You're up awful early," Dad said with a forced smile to hide his disappointment at having his quiet disturbed. "I want to see what it's like out here," Jenny replied defensively, sensing a hint of rejection at her appearance. "Well, let's see then." Dad arose, and together they started on a tour of the yard. They went into the shed and out the back door, where they came upon a clump of neglected peach trees. Dad examined the trees as closely as would a botanist. "These trees go with the house," he said, resting his hand on the limb. "The landlord told me we could have the peaches. It's too late this year, but next year, with good care, maybe we can have all the peaches we want to eat, and even have some left over for canning." This was spoken with the verve of a man who knew he could sustain his very life with peaches. A sure hope the landlord didn't go back on his word, he speculated. With a quick glance at the rosy streaks in the eastern horizon, Dad turned and walked towards the west. The street side of the house. There in the shadows grew thick grass, which indicated good, rich soil. "We can plow up this yard in the spring and plant a big garden. We can grow tomatoes and onions and beans and everything we had in the garden back home. We can have a long row of flowers on the outside." Jenny knew there would be flowers. There was scarcely anything her father loved more than beautiful flowers. He often took them with him on Sunday to decorate the church. "I can work in the garden and grow things, and I already know how to can things," Jenny said, referring to the one time she had stuffed a pickle in a jar. "Right now, we have to think about getting you started in school," Dad said. "They have a kindergarten here, and you're old enough to go. That would free Leela to take a job and earn some money the way she's been wanting to for a long time. I think that would be a real treat for both of you, don't you?" "Oh, I'd love to go to school," Jenny cried excitedly. "Just like Newton Cricket. I know Leela will be all right without my help. She don't seem to mind being alone, and maybe she'd like having a job." "I think so, Billy Goat," he said as he affectionately stroked back the bangs from her eyes. Her hair was getting too long, but he never seemed to have time enough to cut it, only time enough to brush it back. But now they had made a complete circle around the house and were nearing the kitchen door on the east side of the house. Dad entered the kitchen and started putting flour, salt, and baking powder into a bowl to start the biscuits. Leela came in and took over the job. Jenny said, "Leela, guess what? I'm going to go to kindergarten." Jenny said, "That means school," she added, with the assurance of someone who was superior in knowledge. "That's wonderful," Leela said, giving her a hug. "Will you go straighten up the living room for me?" she added deceptively, trying to get the tiny girl out of the kitchen so she could get breakfast. There were a few weeks of settling into their new house and getting used to their new environment. Then school started. For the first time in her life, Jenny walked off from the house in the morning with her brothers and sisters instead of watching enviously as they left for school without her. How she loved the little red chairs pulled up around the low, sleek tables. There were high windows on the east side of the classroom and a door that led into a fenced yard that had swings, sliding boards, and toys. It was a private world for children Jenny's age, and only at the end of the school day did she see her brother and sisters. They walked home together along what grew to be a familiar route with many friends along the way. As fate would have it, it was not Jenny who profited from being with the group on the way home from school. It was Newt. There was a bully in the town who prided himself on being able to hit and insult Newt in order to show off in front of a small gang of followers. He initiated fights by taunts and thefts. One of his favorite assaults was to take Newt's scooter away from him. And when Newt tried to get it back, there was a scuffle, and the bully had fun showing off his prowess. There didn't seem to be any way the children could prevent attacks. They tried to stay together, but this was not a complete answer. It seemed to the children that it was simply their lot to endure whatever existed in their environment. The bully was never quelled, but for some reason, after he found Newt alone and gave him a hard beating, stopped his attacks. No one knew why he stopped. If he felt ashamed, or if his friends turned against him, at last Newt could walk the streets of the little town without being challenged by the bully. Jenny had some tormenting from little girls, but she didn't recognize it as such. They told her to stay away from holes in the ground because rattlesnakes would crawl out of them and bite her. They also said delivery trucks were driven by kidnappers who would put her in the back of the truck and run off with her. Jenny believed everything they told her, and consequently walked clear of holes in the ground and stayed far away from all delivery trucks. The adults in the town were kind to the children. A neighbor watched for them as they went home from school and asked them in for a feast of hot rolls and jelly. One day she gave Jenny a lovely new dress that delighted the child almost as much as the red shoes her father had given her back home. Her feeling of embarrassment when she got the dress dirty was indescribable. Walking home from school one day, the children heard a mysterious hello from the side of the street. They looked in the direction of the sound, but saw no one. "Hello, hello!" echoed a hollow voice. Jenny stepped on the soft green grass and quietly made her way towards a house where she again heard the sound. She reached a side porch and saw a gorgeous parrot sitting in his solitary perch and calling to anyone who would listen. "That's Ahab," came a second voice, this from a lady who had emerged from a garden behind the house. Judging from her garden gloves and her trowel dripping with dirt. "Wait a minute till I put him in his cage, then you can come and see him. He loves children, and you can visit him, but he has strong claws and a very strong beak. Be sure you don't put your hand near his cage." She invited the children onto the porch, where they regarded Ahab as one of the greatest wonders of the world. This became a favorite place the children could visit, and Ahab became one of their favorite pets. At this time, the children had no pets of their own, which was strange, for in their farm they had never been without many animals to love and play with. Now they had adopted pets such as Ahab and Bessie the cow in the field next to their house. One evening at home, after the family had gathered into the living room, Leela began to speak. "I got a letter from Ollie today," and she said she stopped short at a loss for words. "I don't think old Bob could make it," Dad said, coming to her rescue. "That was the reason I didn't bring him out here with us. He was getting old, and he didn't act like he was feeling good. Poor dog is dead now. You can't expect a dog to live much longer than he did. He was, 12 years old? He was going on borrowed time as it was." "I wish I brought him with us," Jenny said, not wanting to disagree with her father, but this was something near to her heart. "We should have been with him when he died. We should have been there to help him." This was all she could say because the tears were getting out of control. Dad knew it was up to him to say something comforting. The whole family sat looking sad and gloomy. "Well, Jenny," he began, "if I'd been old Bob, I'd have wanted you to remember me the way I was when I was healthy and happy, having a good time together. Not the way I was when I was sick and suffering." Ollie said he died peacefully in his sleep, as far as she knew. She just went out on the porch one morning and found him dead. Leela said, holding out the letter for the others to read. Jenny walked to the window. Silently she noticed that it had grown dark outside. How she wished she could go to see Ahab. He would understand how she felt and even say something comforting. He was 30 years old and very wise. If dogs could only live that long. Clip broke the silence. "Remember the time we took old Bob coon hunting? He was better than the hounds. Them hounds just kept pawing and barking up the wrong tree. But old Bob knew that coon wasn't up there. He made a big circle around that tree, and then he went hightailing off to another tree right where we caught the coon. It's like he'd heard them hill stories about coons stopping to lick the scent off their feet to throw off the dogs. I don't know if they really do that. You almost got 'em hurt one time, Dad said with a critical tone. "I told you not to take old Bob with you to bring the cows, but you did anyway. He was so little he had to nip at their ankles to make 'em move, and one of 'em gave him a hard kick. You minded me after that." "The thing I remember most," Leela said, was with a smile, was when Mother used to put Newt out on a quilt under a tree when it was warm. Knowing you, Newt, he'd never stay in one place. Old Bob would be grabbing him by the diaper and pulling him back on the quilt." Dad got up and went to the old trunk where he kept his most prized possession and lifted the lid to where it came to rest on the wall. He took out a wide book of poems from which he had often read aloud to the children in the evenings. First he read about a brave dog that had saved the lives of people in a snowstorm. Then he read about other subjects, and soon the children's thoughts were no longer on the life and death of old Bob. But the memory of old Bob was always cherished, and some of the children carried a permanent sense of guilt over having left him in the Ozarks when the family moved to Kansas. School was pleasant for Jenny. She performed in a pageant with other little girls who pretended to be brightly colored flowers and danced on the stage in their cardboard and crepe paper dresses. But it was the church that sponsored the most unforgettable Halloween party. Jenny got lost as soon as she got to the churchyard. She had been following her father, intent on the sight of his shoes. Suddenly she looked up and saw that they were not her father's shoes at all. They belonged to a total stranger. She was not afraid, though, only puzzled because she didn't know where to enter the church. She had studied her letters and some words at school, but her confidence was shattered when she proudly related a story she had been reading, and Clarence said, "That's not what it said at all." She read the sign above one door, and it read adults. She walked around to the other side of the church, and above the door was the word children. She wasn't sure which she was. She thought about it for a long time and decided that since she was now going to school and learning to read, she was no longer a child, but an adult, and she entered through the door marked adults. The moment she stepped inside, she began to be frightened. There was a tunnel that descended down into the bottom of the church. It was dark and springy. All around her were eerie-looking creatures. They were fearsome and accentuated by dim lights and dark shadows. She emerged from the end of the tunnel, and a monster pressed cold, white worms into the palm of her hand. She flung them out instantly. She wiped her hand on her dress and looked for something pleasant in the room, but she saw nothing she liked. She sat down to think, but the chair gave her a terrible shock, and she jumped up again. Someone approached her and put something into her hand that stung her, and at last, in desperation, she started to cry. Jenny almost never cried, but her whole world had turned into an ugly, cruel monsters, and she didn't know where to turn to find the helpful friend she had always relied on. It was at this time that someone noticed she didn't belong there, that she was just a little child who had stumbled into the wrong party. One of the monsters' heads came off, and underneath was a kind human face that smiled down on her. This kind gentleman took her by the hand and led her up some lighted stairs to the children's party. Jenny emerged into a brightly lit room and took one of the many chairs set against the wall. She, along with the other young children, watched a parade of clowns and people in animal suits. It was a tame party, a shocking contrast to her recent experience. It was so lacking in excitement that Jenny wondered if there was really this much difference between children and adults. After a time, her father came to take her home. She let him believe that she had enjoyed her evening and never told him of her confusion about whether she was an adult or a child, and the suffering it had caused her.